Kimmy, are you good with this? Keep it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Great, so let's go ahead and turn it on to Zelda. Do you need a mic, Zelda?
No, I don't think so. So, good morning, ¿qué tal? Let me first start by saying that it is incredibly intimidating and as well an honor to even be sitting in this panel because, for example, most of what Dr. Pearl and Eddie Lyllye here said, I was only really little when a lot of this was occurring. So you might ask them, why are you up here as a panel? I asked that too. Am I an elder all of a sudden? And my husband had to remind me, well, actually you are, because most of you are probably the same age as if I had grandchildren. So I am an elder. So I am Zelda Lopez, that's me back there. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Oregon. And although, Mr. Crow might not have respected his PhD, for me, it has been an incredible struggle to gain what it is. As a Yaqui Chicana, and especially as coming from a group of what we call Latinos today, the educational outcome for us has not been great. No, and it still is, and I think currently we're at 68% of graduation and 49 if you are not an English speaker. So I am a neplanta. You might have read that in my bio. And what is a neplanta? Neplanta is from the Nahua, which is an indigenous word from Mexico, and it means those of us who live in between, right? So as a Chicana, I've always felt that my life falls in between. We live in a black and white paradigm. Often we are considered recently arrived immigrants, even though many of us have roots in the United States before it was the United States. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the notion, because I don't even know what they teach you in history anymore, because I know that the struggle for us to integrate our history as Chicanos has been an incredible struggle. It has created an amount of divide and conquer, even with Native America. For example, we're taught to separate ourselves from Native America, but yet we're indigenous peoples. People have heard of the Maya, people have heard of the Toltecs, the Aztecs. All of those people were our ancestors as Chicanos. But once we crossed the border, or rather la frontera los cruzó a nosotros. What does that mean? The border crossed us. That history has been erased. And so most people look at us and say, well, you speak Spanish, so y'all must be from Spain. And no, we are not from Spain. In all reality, Spain came to us. So this is why, for example, I do not call myself a Hispanic. First and foremost, I don't like a term with the word panic in it. Nor do, as a feminist, do I like this notion of his Spain, right? So to be called a Hispanic in all reality is what has caused the idea that we're not indigenous to this country, because we continually align ourselves with Spain. But yet that's not the identity that we chose as a community. That was an identity that was imposed upon us during the Nixon era in order to be able to distinguish who the heck are these people, right? They're not black, they're not white, they're not registered Native Americans, so who are they? And so they said, well, they speak this language all the way from South America to the US, they speak this language, Spanish, so they must come from Spain. But no, we're not. So I'm a critical educational activist. Are we born activists, or are we created as activists? Right? Because to me, it was my environment that I believe has influenced what I call myself now a scholar activist. Because in order to really fight the system, many times we have to become part of that system. And not in any way to be on the other side of the oppressor, but kind of like I had a Native American friend that taught me, in order to defeat the system, we must be like going up the bear's ass, excuse my language, into the stomach and eating from the inside out, integrating ourselves into the system to make that change. That's what I have been part of. So getting back, coming around again, I am a post-civil rights Chicana. I was born in 1960. When I came into the educational system, I didn't speak English, I spoke Spanish. So Spanish, or I like to call Mexicanized Spanish, was my first language. I still remember a time when there was Mexican Day at the swimming pool. We could only go to the swimming pool on Wednesdays, which was Mexican Day. So I was still alive when all that was happening. And people think that the 60s were like this history that took place so long ago. But most of us are still alive, right? And we remember that time. So I remember I was 9 years old when I watched Cesar Chavez and the Farm Workers Union. And I said, I want to be like him. And my dad said, you're crazy, you're stupid. You don't want to do that because all you're going to do is cause trouble. But was he causing trouble? Sure, if he was causing trouble because he was questioning the status quo. Also, it was a time when I said, that's what I want to be. And I remember telling my father, I want to go to college, because during that time, early 70s, the Chicano Movimiento was happening alongside the American Indian movement, alongside the African American Civil Rights movement. The 60s, late 60s, early 70s was a volatile, exciting time to be alive because changes were being created where changes had not taken place for us before. But when we're taught about the civil rights, often many groups are left out of the context, and it looks like it's this one-dimensional civil rights. But that's not true, because when we think of civil rights, we all know who Martin Luther King is. But it disturbs me when I ask young people who Cesar Chavez is, and you know what people have told me? Isn't he the boxer? And like Julio Cesar Chavez? No, he was not a boxer. And many people think that his struggle was simply the rights of Mexicans, the rights of farm workers, and that's not true. He was actually a human rights leader. I actually met him and worked alongside him during his last years of his life in San Luis, Arizona. And it was actually a case that I opened. I was a paralegal for the United Farm Workers Union back in 1989 when I was working for the amnesty program under Ronald Reagan again. That man keeps coming up. And I remember being a paralegal and working there for the United Farm Workers Union, and all of a sudden I had these farm workers just come into my office, and I'm like, what are you going to do? And what it was is Bruce Church was the leading farmer of the lettuce that we all utilize within this country. Bruce Church is the largest. Well, had refused to pay these people. And so they all piled it to my office and said, what are you going to do about it? I opened a case. And I talk about this because this is a very influential time in my life. Cesar Chavez came down and we began a fight because the union had been banned in Arizona. They couldn't organize, right? So he came down during that time, opened up a case, started this whole movement against Bruce Church. That was the last place that he worked. That's where he passed away. So I always kind of carried inside of me that perhaps if I wouldn't have opened that case, he might not have gone there. But that's not what happened. But needless to say, they did end up getting paid. But the union still has not been allowed to formulate in the state of Arizona. The state of Arizona is a right-to-work state, very similar to Oregon. So it wasn't that. So who am I? What am I doing here? Why is it important for me to talk to you as the next generation? As it was said before, yes, I was a high school dropout. I went to one of the oldest schools in Tucson High School. I dropped out of high school, got married at a very early age, had 3 children. Life was not easy for me. I was a victim of domestic violence. My mother was a victim of domestic violence, and so it was kind of a cycle that I couldn't break until I left Arizona and actually moved to Eugene, Oregon. I found myself here, a single mom, homeless, Eventually, I got my life back together, and I decided that it was time for me to go to college. Why not? I'd always wanted to do that. Even, like I said, when I was young, and I had asked my father, why can't I go to college? And he said, porque estás pendeja, which means you're a dumbass, because our people don't go to college. Our people work for a living, which to me is one of the most saddest things. This is why there's only like 5% of college professors around the nation are Latino. 5%, but yet we make up 18% of this population in the United States. So it was kind of like attitudes of my father, and it wasn't his fault. He was a product of his own time as well. He was a Yaqui. He didn't understand that we had the right to also go to school. But since the creation of the border, it was an ideology that says that we were America's workforce. Who do you see picking your fruits and vegetables? What group do you see? You see the group that I come. You know, who's your maid, your toilet cleaners? And that was my life. Anyhow, so found myself here, started going to school. Dr. Pearl actually has been one of my greatest mentors in my program. Horrible program, but nevertheless, I'm getting through it. Because I will be the first person, not only in my immediate family and my siblings, but I'm talking about cousins, uncles, aunts, grandparents to earn a PhD. Ever.
They didn't make it easy for you.
No, they didn't make it. They're still not making it easy. But you know what? The biggest thing is when I write my acknowledgement thing, one of the things I will say is I got through this not because of you, but in spite of you. Right? And it's not like everything that I've done, I have dedicated in order to raise people up and to say, you know what, you have the right to be educated. Just because you're a woman of color, you have the right to be educated. And it's disconcerting to me that here we are in 2015 and that I still have to talk to you about this. That these changes that we have been fighting for since the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s are still occurring today. And so how do you take your human capital, of who you are as an individual, and put it forth? First and foremost, we have to always remember that being on opposite ends and fractioning off into different movements and into different groups has not really helped us. In fact, it has divided and conquered us even further. So as I grow older, I'm no longer angry. I'm more sad than anything else. But I've also learned to practice what is called anti-oppression. Because when we think that we're doing right and we become centric in who we are and what our movement are, we end up oppressing other people. So if all I care about is the educational rights of Latinos, that makes me just as oppressive, right? So it's not just about Latino rights. It's about all of our rights within this nation that we share. We all belong here. And it is like they say, a place where we all have come to seek refuge, but yet it's also a place where it has been oppressive for many of us. And when I pass away, all I want is for people to remember me is that I didn't do this for me, I did it for you. I kept all of you in mind when I go forward as an educator, because it bothers me that education in 2015 is still on the banking system. What does that mean? What does the banking system mean? It means an educational system sees you as an empty vessel, that all they do is pour information into you, and you don't have the right to even think about that information or to even say, I want that information in my head. And so I'm one of these people, Dr. Pearl is one of these people that we fight for the right for critical thinking to be part of your curriculum and not just part of your banking system. So I'm going to stop there so that I can have my friend here speak and so that I can answer your questions, because I'm sure you have some. All right?
Good morning. Thank you for that. Before I start, this saying, give people their flowers while they can yet smell them. And I want to give Dr. Art Pearl some flowers. Because way back when I was a teenager, there was a program at the University of Oregon called Project 75, where 75 African American students were brought to campus, given financial aid, and said, go get educated. But nobody was there to guide them through this labyrinth called higher education. 6 students actually graduated from that program out of 75. And you know why? Because Dr. Art Pearl took them under his wing and helped them as their guide, as their mentor. You see, that's a part of my history that I won't give up, and I want to say thank you. Thank you on behalf of those students. One of those students was my dearest friend, Pearl Hill. And she went on from being a member of Project 75 to running the Upper Bound program at the University of Oregon for 26 years.
You realize he's still alive. He was the oldest surviving sickle cell.
Yes.
And he's in D.C. now.
Yes. So I am just honored to be sitting here with such distinguished folks. I always say to people, I'm just Lyllye Reynolds Parker. I'm Maddie and Sam's little daughter. I really am not an extraordinary person, but if you want to think I am, I'll accept that. I am born in Eugene, Oregon, and I kind of think that distinguishes me from the other members of this panel. May 8, 1946, I was born at Sacred Heart Hospital. And I have to share this with you because I share it each time I speak to young folks, because I want you to understand this city that you live in. It's a whole nother world. My birth certificate said that both my parents were white. And when I looked at it, and I was going to go into beauty college after high school, and I'll tell you that story, I went back to my mother and said, something's wrong here. I got the wrong parents. And this is my rationale for why my birth certificate said my parents were white. I'm the first African-American baby born at Sacred Heart. It's 1946. The Klan was very prevalent, and racist attitude was the highest ranking ideology in Lane County. So Sacred Heart couldn't tell the public that a black woman gave birth. It would ruin them as, and they say nonprofit, I say a profitable institution. So my birth certificate says I'm white. I was amazed. That was the first time, honestly, that cognitively I thought, something ain't right here. Because when I was growing up as a child, there was this veil placed over the actual environment that I grew up in. So I grew up a happy child. I grew up in my village on West 11th with the other Negroes. I left my village every day to go to school at Bailey Hill Elementary, Wilson Junior High, then Jefferson Junior High. Sophomore year at South, junior year at North, and I graduated from Shelby. But at the end of the day, I went back to my village. When I was in elementary school, I didn't even consider the fact that I didn't visit my friend's home, nor did they visit mine. It was just life. I went home to my village. All of my friends were there, and all my friends looked just like me. It took me a while to realize I didn't go visit my friend's home because I was Negro. And in my friend's home, the culture was Those in children don't come here. They stay with their own. And you know, their mother and daddy, they don't want them to associate with you either. So this is just how life is. And you know what? Just like we do with our politicians today, we bought that information and took it to the bank and made a deposit. And nobody looked back or asked any questions. So when I wanted to be a Girl Scout, if I didn't have my quarter every week to pay my dues, I couldn't go to meeting. And then it was hard because the meetings were held in private homes of the leaders, and they didn't want me in their home, but they didn't tell me outright, they just treated me different. And I would go home and say to my mom, I just don't feel like they want me there. And she'd say, oh, you'll be okay. You just go back. You're just as good as anybody else. And I understood that, but it didn't make me feel good for my mom to tell me that and to go and have these white kids' moms look at me like, how dare you think you can come in here and be on the same platform as these little white girls? You see, I would like for you to all, if you have social media, go to Facebook and search out, you know you grew up in Eugene if. And it's a Facebook page established by growing up in Eugene folks in my age group. And they're reminiscing about their childhood. And one day I get a call saying, you need to join that group because they're talking about your dad. My father did not set foot in a schoolhouse either. He went to the cotton fields. But when he came to Oregon, he eventually bought a sawmill. And the story goes that nobody would sell him logs or deliver him logs. And I found that not to be true. Now, that's the history presented by those in power in Eugene, Oregon. That was not true. My father had to leave and go back south on business. He left his office administrator in charge. When the log trucks came with the logs, she didn't pay him. So they didn't bring the logs. And the sawmill lost money. And when my dad came back and found out what happened, he had to sell the sawmill in order to pay his vendors. And my brother tells me, he and my older brother, Sam, my dad hired them to unlock the gates to let the log trucks come in. He said, he just paid us a little bit, but he paid us. So when he paid off everybody else, he paid off his sons. And so they were talking about my father and his sawmill, and so I went on the site, and I said, yes, that was my father. And they started talking about experiences that they had had. And I said, you know, it's like I was born in a foreign country. Because I can't relate to any of this. I didn't go to JCPenney's lunch counter and eat, nor the Bar Marseille. I didn't go in there. And later, during the Civil Rights Movement, when I went in there, somebody was pinned to my hip and followed me all around the store because they wanted to make sure I didn't rob them blind. And the only reason they had to think that I might rob them blind is because my skin was brown. That was my experience. I didn't go swimming at the Jefferson Pool. It wasn't open to me. There were restaurants downtown, Seymour's being one of them, that had a sign in the window, whites only. But these kids said, oh no, that didn't happen, Lily. And we don't want you coming in here stirring up trouble. And I said, but it's my experience. You can't blot out my history because it doesn't match yours. I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I want you to be educated. Life wasn't a bowl of cherries for me. The only time I got to eat sweet cherries cherries was when I was on West 11th in my village. When people actually recognized me and allowed me to be somebody. If you do your research and go back and look at the records for School District 4J, and that's where I grew up in, every African American student that entered District 4J in my generation, and I think they might still label us this way, learning disability. I had a learning disability. I didn't know I had a learning disability. As a matter of fact, people all my life told me how smart I am. But in school, I had a learning disability. When we have questions and answers, I want you to ask me, Ms. Parker, why do you think they labeled you with the learning disability? Because I'd like to answer that question for you, but I'm not going to answer it now, because I don't want to give you something to ask me later on. So going through the system, all I saw was the end. I wanted out. I didn't have fun in school. I wasn't allowed to have a class with another African American student. So I'm the only dark spot in the classroom. When we studied the epoch of slavery, I wanted to crawl under the desk because the teacher made me feel so inferior. And I thought, I hated myself. And they taught me to hate myself because of the way they taught that history. And then I brought 2 kids into this world and I sent them through 4J. And my son was in the 8th grade and they were studying the epoch of slavery. And his teacher, Larry Lewin, I will never forget the man, he called me and said, Mrs. Parker, I'm going to teach about slavery. I want to teach it from an empowering stance. What do you suggest we do? We developed the Speakers Bureau. And we brought people in who could talk to those children and allow them to know that, yes, that's a part of our history. My ancestors were slaves in this country, stolen from their land where they could have been queens and kings and brought here as slaves to raise the economy of this country and white folks. However, nobody told about all the accomplishments we made, all the strife, all the modern conveniences that were created by my ancestors so that you could live better. Nobody talked about that. Nobody talked about the fact that my grandmother and great-grandmother and great-great-grandmother raised your great-grandmother, great-great-great-grandmother, because we took care of the babies. Now, white society entrusted their greatest assets to my grandmothers, but they didn't see me as being good enough to sit down in the schoolhouse with their children. You see, what I want you young folks to understand is, you're even in a different day. You are so much removed from what life was in Eugene, Oregon in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And you will say, well, that was yesterday, this is today. But if you don't know what yesterday was, how can you live today? If you want to be an activist, if you want to be an ally, how do you know what you're working towards if you don't know the history? And I want you to understand this is repeating itself. We're slipping backwards. Yes, we had all these movements. We had the Civil Rights Movement. We had the Native American Movement. We had the Chicano Latino Movement. We had the Asian Movement. We had the Women's Movement. We got affirmative action. But you know who got the most values and the most mileage out of affirmative action? White women, because they were a minority. And this way, white men could stay in control. Hire a white woman, you got affirmative action covered. Bring in a black male and a white woman, they're both equally qualified, hire the woman. you got it covered. Let's keep these